Hi, beautiful community. I'm not Vlad, I'm Vlad's double. Vlad did a main channel video yesterday with a comprehensive analysis of what went down in Alaska, and his health has crashed. And so he sent a double to talk to you about doubles, about whether Putin went to Alaska or whether Putin sent a double to Alaska. You voted on this, beautiful community. And something like 30% of you are saying it's a double, and most of you think it was the real Putin. You've got to be careful, because a lot of people, of course, are saying it's a double in a tongue-in-cheek way. This is a fun topic. So epistemically, I want to be... By the way, I am the real Vlad. I'm just teasing. I would never mislead you like that. Epistemically, when I tell you Western democracy is declining, I'm serious. If you come back and challenge me, I'm going to challenge you back. But this is a topic where I encourage a big leeway for having a bit of fun. So I might say some things firmly, but that doesn't mean I am keen to insist on them with you the way I'm keen to insist on things when we're making serious judgments about our social and political world. First qualification. Second qualification. I think we'd have a main channel video on Putin's doubles in general. Not just because it's a fun topic, but because it does raise questions about obfuscation in an authoritarian regime. It does raise questions about Putin's paranoia in his relationship with his security. It does raise questions for us about falling into a conspiracy theory mindset. And it does raise questions for us about getting depoliticized and relating to politics as though it were not politics but political entertainment. So because of that, we're going to restrict ourselves today to just the question of Alaska, not the wider question of what Putin does with his doubles and whether it was the real Putin that went to Dagestan or that went to Mariupol. We're just doing Alaska. So what have you got to do? Well, you've got to have some fun. But on top of having some fun, if you want to get epistemically pedantic, the main thing you got to do is make sure that you're not making the judgment on the basis of what you know about Putin, but instead making a judgment on the basis of what you need to know about Putin to make a judgment like that. And it might be that you find out that there are several things you need to know about Putin that you don't know, or that you can't be bothered to know, or you don't have the time to know about Putin, that may still be important for making this judgment. And that's going to leave you in a position of having a bit of fun with this question, but not necessarily being able to be honest with yourself and say, oh yeah, I've worked it out, and here is the answer. So how does this distinction between what you know and what you actually need to know work in practice? Well, what happens with a lot of people is that they recognize Putin physically, and they are familiar with public appearances he's made, important moments of historical moment, where he's often looked stern, and that's the sense that people have of Putin. But they don't speak Russian, they don't know Putin's personality, they don't know his full range of expression, they don't know how he reacts to different environments. And so you end up in a situation where you're basically trying to figure out whether something is an apple or a pear by holding it in your hand without looking at it and without tasting it. You can get some of the way there just by having the apple or the pear in your hand, but you'll often struggle. And you'll often be blown out of the water by somebody. That was very Australian, water. That was one of my most Australian waters. You could be blown out of the water by somebody who actually gets to taste the fruit and gets to look at the fruit. And you might be sort of spending 4 hours figuring out, is it an apple, is it a pear? But they might just say, boom, I've tasted it, it's a pear. So many big accounts said that Putin was not the real Putin in Alaska because he was so gleeful about being there, and his body language was unusual. It was insecure, it was eccentric, it was erratic, it was shy, it was strange to see Putin go like that, like that, like that. He kind of looked like an imposter compared to these stern presentations I've seen from him when the Prigozhin mutiny is happening. In reality, everything we saw from Putin in Alaska was very, very Putin. Putin can be silly, he can be awkward, and interestingly, he's actually socially shy. He has a significant inner confidence, which is a product of having enormous power for 3 decades. Interestingly, it's not a consequence of him being free inside. He's very unfree inside. So he's not in the awful language of the manosphere, he's not an alpha male because he's a beta male inside. But he has alpha male-like qualities and a partial confidence that are in part a product of having unlimited power for such a long period of time. But socially he can be shy, and he's often shy. Somebody else, by the way, who is an authoritarian but not a tyrant, an authoritarian populist, Boris Johnson, the former UK Prime Minister, Boris is shy too. Boris craves attention and has a genius for irresponsibility and untruthfulness. But Boris is often caught out feeling shy in a social situation. That's just him. He deals with it, but he's shy, he's awkward. Putin can be shy too. Many tyrants historically have been shy. So once you allow in familiarity with Putin's psychological profile, you see that his acting out in Alaska was normal. But you've got to have that profile, and that means understanding Putin's personality. It means speaking Russian. It means knowing what Putin feels and what he thinks, which the vast majority of you don't, right? Because it'd be silly for you to. You would need to follow Putin more closely than is good for you, and you need to learn foreign language that you might not want to use. So it's not worth your time, quite frankly. But think about it the other way. Think of the leader of your country making a speech for 10 minutes or 8 minutes, as Putin did, and think about how you'd be able to profile them psychologically, and think about how you'd react if somebody who doesn't speak a word of English came along and said, well, yes, that 8-minute speech of Keir Starmer, I can't really judge. I don't know if that's what is usual for Starmer or not, but his chin looked different and he waved in the wrong way. Well, like, mate, if you can't tell whether it's Keir Starmer from the 8-minute speech because you don't speak English and you don't know his personality, I think you need to get a little bit conservative about your judgments about his waves and about his funny gesticulations. So, much of the internet said that it was a double, and beautiful friend of the channel, Jake Bro, also speculated he thought it might be a double. But once you put the Putin profile in there, a familiarity with Putin in a psychologically three-dimensional way, then it's not a question. It doesn't arise as a question. So it's not that it's unlikely. It's zero. It's a zero chance that it wasn't the real Putin. What I mean by zero isn't some kind of scientific certainty. It's that if you know Putin, that's Putin. That's to say, it's conceivable that it was a double, in principle, but in practice there is nothing we have seen that, if we are familiar with Putin, would make us on this occasion raise a question. And we're not talking about other occasions. We're not talking about Dagestan or Mariupol. That we'll talk about separately on the main channel. Then there is a less important reason. And the less important reason is that if you are familiar with Putin's personality, you would know that there's no way he wouldn't go to meet Trump in Alaska, and there is no way he would take the risk of sending a double. That would be spectacularly un-Putin. But you also have to know the guy's personality for that. So it's a 0 on this occasion, but it doesn't follow to 0 on other occasions about which we'll talk. Now, I haven't come over the top of you with this. You're completely allowed to still reconstruct an account of how it may have been a double. It's not something that in my capacity as a minor public intellectual and political philosopher, I feel I want to impose on you. So I want to re-emphasize that again, because I know the power of impact when you speak with confidence into a camera. You can sort of chase away disagreement. And I'm not intending to do it on this occasion. I'm intending to free you up to be yourself, seriously or trivially, on this topic. But speaking of seriousness and triviality, I made a serious video about what actually went down in Alaska on the main channel yesterday. It was really, really tough to do it physically. I crashed really badly for many, many hours, but I managed to do that 20-30 minutes in the wheelchair. And it's not a brilliant analysis, but it's a good plus to very good analysis. And it is utterly brilliant relative to, quite frankly, a lot of the fare you've got on television, a lot of the fare you've got on many YouTube shows. It does cut deeper. But that's only relative. I don't think it's a brilliant analysis in of itself. But I highly recommend you see it if you haven't. It's the first video on the main channel in half a year. So it's going to really struggle algorithmically. And it's a 9-minute watch over here or over here, beautiful community. And we'll have, unfortunately, probably a more serious conversation soon on the chat channel tomorrow. Lots of love.